Coming up on the Men at the Movies podcast, we go on the run with the next 3 days. When facing a hopeless and helpless situation, love is inherently irrational. We discuss loving our wives well in the face of the evidence that says we've done enough. We offer compassion without expecting a response, die on her behalf many times in a manner that never gets easier. Let's embrace the irrationality and join us as we discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being.
Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me once again from Lynchburg, Virginia, is Wailer. How you doing today, Wailer?
So good to be with you again today. I love that intro every time. Whatever you did on the production side of that thing, the energy is just so on point.
One of the sort of models for this show is a podcast called The Rewatchables, where these guys from The Ringer, they talk about movies, obviously, that are rewatchable and what goes into it and like all this other stuff. And I was like, oh, that's awesome how they talk about it and break out down these awesome movies. Their logo and their music sucks. Like, it is not appealing. I'm like, this is weird. This is, super generic. It's like, I don't know. I don't like it at all. So when I was creating this podcast, I was like, no, I've got to find a song that resonates or music that resonates that I like, that I can get into. That intro when we first started, I think it was like a minute and a half long or something, just the music part. And we'd have a bunch of different quotes in there. So we narrowed it down to just the couple in like 30 seconds.
Dialed in. And for the rewatchables, you've got
Sweet.
Accolades Extended and Shots Fired.
It's good. You got to just skip through it. And you're like, the logo makes no sense. So obviously the last time you referenced that it was your application for the Men at the Movies podcast. It went through, HR gave all the approvals and everything. So hopefully we'll be seeing you on a regular basis.
All right. Is this a probationary period?
I don't know. I haven't had anybody that's been like, hey, I haven't had to fire anybody. So we haven't gotten to there.
HR is pretty light.
HR is pretty, yeah, it's all in my mind. So
excellent.
So it's like that commercial where the dude was every employee, like he was in HR and finance and payroll and all that stuff. That's me.
Oh.
So the next 3 days, which came out in 2010, stars Russell Crowe, Elizabeth Banks. It's got Liam Neeson popping up, Brian Dennehy, Lenny James, who you may not know the name, but if you saw him, he was the detective who's chasing them all over Pittsburgh. Nobody I knew when I said, yeah, we're doing this movie. Even when you brought it up, I was like, I've never seen this movie. And I looked it up and I saw the cast. I was like, I absolutely want to see it. The synopsis is there's a husband and wife with a son. The wife gets charged with murder and is in jail for 3 years. All the evidence points to her. And so then the husband, because they've run out of appeals, she's facing life in prison. And he's basically takes matters in his own hands, and his plan is to break her out of prison and go run and live life on the run, which all sounds great. It's good. It's enjoyable. Like while they're running from the prison, my heart is like pounding, wondering what's going to happen. So Wailer, when I said, and it was funny because you sent me the list of movies, possible movies. And I think almost at the same time we said, I haven't seen Next 3 Days. And you were like, Next 3 Days is really interesting. So what was it? What is it about this movie that jumps out, that moves you, that you're like, man, this is a good movie?
Aesthetically, I think it's perfectly executed. It's one of those movies where I love every frame. Every performance is totally on point. There's not a single dud anywhere. It's another partial exception. Usually if a movie totally owns me, the score is just perfect. This one doesn't have a bad score or soundtrack, but I don't remember really connecting with it on a musical level until the very end with the outro. And something about that outro theme cuts through me every time. And I forget that it's there. You know, it's like if it's months or years till I watch the movie again, every time it'll surprise me and just get me. And so the character formation that you see in Russell Crowe and in his character, I just feel like I either understand it or aspire after it at every point. He is singularly devoted to his wife, without exception. Just a perfectly virtuous man in her direction. And so the stakes, the extents that he goes to,
right,
to continue being her man, I hope I don't ever have to find myself in that predicament and then answer those questions for myself. But I can't help but admire him. And not just on rescuing her. Of course, that's heroic, makes for big, flashy storytelling on screen. But there's a lot of pedestrian scenes in the movie where I just see so much courage in him in being stalwart in his devotion. He will not be another woman's man, short of her dying. He really exemplifies till death do us part.
Yeah, and that's, you know, it's, I did a very little research, basically looked at Wikipedia, and it was based on a French film called Pour Elle. I don't speak French, so I don't know. I'm pretty sure I didn't say it right. But what it
just do it pretentious and you do it right.
Nasally. But it translates into anything for her. And but it didn't, according to the director for this movie, Haggis, he said it didn't go far enough. It didn't push the husband far enough. And in many ways, this is, I don't want to say a trope in storytelling, but this is sort of what happens in storytelling is let's put this guy or this woman in this situation, see how they try to get out of it, throw up an obstacle, see how they try to get out of it, keep doing that and see who that person becomes. And in this scenario, you have a guy, like, as you mentioned, who will do anything for his wife. What Cavalier, who is the director of the French film, he said, we wanted to make a real human story about an ordinary man doing extraordinary things because he's faced with a miscarriage of justice. He believes his wife is innocent. All the evidence proves otherwise. The question that Haggis asked was, would you save the woman you loved if you knew by doing it, you'd become someone she'd no longer love? And it sort of, the story reminded me of a Breaking Bad type of story. I don't think Russell Crowe's character, John, quite goes all the way. He doesn't become Heisenberg of the drug. He tries to blow up a meth lab, I think, but he even fails at that. But that framework of loving your wife, and especially in a scenario, we were talking that frequently in the church, it's very easy to paint the husband as sort of the problem. He's the workaholic. He's the drinker. He's the golfer. He's the this. He's the womanizer. You know, he's the problem in a lot of the...
Yeah. Or even if it's not a vice, he's just not really connected to her. Right. He's not totally present to the kids.
He doesn't come to church. She goes and takes the kids, right? And so this, you know, we're sort of putting on our glasses to interpret some of this stuff, because there are a couple scenes in this movie where, you know, I found myself getting emotional, and we'll talk about that. But that idea of what would you do for your wife? How committed are you? That idea of what do you do when the wife is problematic? Or what's that word that you used?
Pernicious.
How do we respond to that in a way that is aligned with the calling and the purpose God has placed on us as men and as husbands?
Chesterton is such a wit wizard Yeah, he was the one that said that wit can get underneath the door when seriousness is still fumbling at the handle. He said that marriage is a fight to the death, which no man of honor should refuse. That's one of those sentiments that I both love and hate in equal measure. Because I think you're right when it comes to what are the things that we actually get to expect as Christian men surrendered to the master in a married life. The only promise we really get in that arrangement is that we are expected to die on her behalf. And that might be a bunch of times. That might be a death that never gets much more pleasant in the life between them. I don't think that has to be the common story, but I know I've got some pals that I do not envy the life they found themselves in. And it's going to be a hard road. But is that their calling? Yeah, there's a question there. It's so easy for men to think about missional activity when it has to do with vocation. I'm doing these things, and that's my participation in expanding the kingdom. But then to look at the sanctuary of our homes and to see our wife as really our primary responsibility. And I don't mean that in the sense that we're lording anything over her. We are the ones that have the biggest ability to respond to her story. And so how do we show up for her in that regard? What are the prison-like elements that continue to afflict her? Things that were never her fault, but she's stuck with them regardless. And then similarly with our children, in the Great Commission of making disciples, our kids represent the best chance we ever have of making disciples. They get the most time with us. We have the most influence with them. And it's a thing that I see a lot of guys, they're more enchanted by the idea of making disciples of strangers or, acquaintances. But the call is first on making disciples of your children, and to have that kind of intergenerational influence so that your great grandkids know your name and your stories because of how much you poured yourself into your kids and your grandkids.
Channeling that G.K. Chesterton again, there was a survey that came out. I mean, this was over 100 years ago. But it was in the London Times of what is wrong with the world. And Chesterton responded, I am. And there are women out there, just as there are men out there, who make marriage difficult, who are not great partners. The Proverbs talk about the dangers of living with a contentious and pernicious woman and how miserable that is. That is the reality. And I've seen women who have taken care of husbands with ALS or dementia, husbands who have taken care of wives with strokes. There is a reality that the world would say, you've done enough, right? But in this movie, and we're going to pull up one of the clips here, he's a teacher, teaches literature, and he's talking about Don Quixote. And what do we know about Don Quixote? I don't know much other than I went to the town where Cervantes is, because when we visited Spain, that's one thing. He fought. He thought he was a knight, and he fought windmills. That's about all I know. Do you know anything more?
Man, it was in high school when we read it. There might be a smattering of other stories, but yeah, that's the extent of it. The tension between the ideal and reality.
Yeah. So he's going to ask a question about what do you think of sort of when you think of Don Quixote? What is the core of the story? And the cool thing about questions when they're asked, whether they're asked on a podcast or on a movie, your brain automatically answers. It's like, ooh, a question, let me answer it. And I start thinking futility and efforts, pointlessness of pursuits. Like that to me, because it's like, here's this guy who's misguided, who doesn't understand the world he lives in, who's trying to be something he's not, fighting an enemy that doesn't really exist. Like that's how I look at it. But as we're going to hear in this quote, as John is reacting, because when they got the news that there's no more appeals, Laura, his wife, played by Elizabeth Banks, she tries to commit suicide. And so he's there in the hospital. They have this intense look of sort of the understanding the helplessness and the hopelessness of the situation where they find themselves. And then that sort of fades and goes into this lecture to say, here's this hopeless situation that they are facing. She is in prison. He is raising their son, who is having problems because his mom's in prison, right? His mom's not there. And so the in the storytelling stuff is like, okay, how do you respond to this? And that's where this lecture comes in.
So, the life and times of Don Quixote, what is it about?
That someone's belief in virtue is more important than virtue itself.
Yes, that's in there. But what is it about? Could it be about how rational thought destroys your soul? Could it be about the triumph of irrationality and the power that's in that? You know, we spend a lot of time trying to organize the world. We build clocks and calendars and we try and predict the weather. But what part of our life is truly under our control?
There is a whole lot that we could break down from those little nuggets that he shares in that piece. But which one sticks out to you the most?
The part where he needs to see his wife well, that when he's talking about the metrics that are summarily unreliable in life, that's the one that he cannot let go of. You know, before we cracked the mic and went live, we were having some banter with each other, trying to discern how much of his course of action is ultimately justifiable, right? And it's so poignant here that the thing that puts him on the course of action was when her life was in peril. Because at that point, it's not just about, I don't like that she's in prison. This is unfair. She doesn't deserve this. When she might die, that's when, for him, all bets are off. And then he's got singular focus, laser beam intensity. And so there we get the Don Quixote element with Dulcinea. He was enamored with that woman. And the way that Don Quixote sees Dulcinea is not the way... Who's his sidekick? Is it Pancho? Is that his name?
Yeah, I think so.
He's got his squire. When he describes her, she was a very plain woman. You know, somebody that he didn't take any notice of, but he saw Don Quixote's eyes for her and thought there must have been something that he didn't see. And God bless, what a beautiful, challenging calling for men to see their eyes with something like mystic wives. You know, almost like the way you know Frodo sees Arwen. You know, when he has a vision of her in her ethereal elvish state. You know, she's still an elf, so she still has the elf good looks going for her. So it's not like Galadriel. No, it's not. Well, yeah, he does have that moment with Galadriel, but I'm thinking about when Arwen's rescuing him.
Oh, yeah.
Initially, he gets stabbed by the Nazgul. Yeah. And so, you know, she's a woods woman. Like, she's dressed up like she is for bushcraft and, you know, shooting and riding. But then when she shows up to minister to Frodo, he catches this other glimpse of her. You know, he sees the glorious state of Arwen. Man, to have eyes like that for our women, to see them, to have something like a vision of their future reality in the Lord. You know, who are they in their most glorious state as he's making them to be, and to be appropriately confused. I mean, I've grown up with a dad and two grandfathers that really exemplified that kind of life. With my mom, my grandmothers, they only ever saw the best in them. If there were ever rage arguments, I never knew anything about it. All I saw was the men in my life absolutely adoring their women, as if they were Arwen, as if they were Galadriel. And so if Don Quixote can do it with Dulcinea, when sounds like a pretty average woman, right? But he's just adoring her. And here we see Russell Crowe's character being fixated, just ferociously devoted to his wife because it's her. It's just her. It was wisdom that Granddaddy gave my dad when he was in the throes of deciding if he was going to marry my mom or not. And Granddaddy told him, he said, "Son," old Virginia man, Virginia born, bred, lived his entire life. He said, "Son, you're going to meet a lot of women that it would be very easy for you to live with. But you're only going to meet one that you can't live without." When Dad heard that, that was it. That was the only clarity he needed. And we see that with John. Yeah. He cannot live without her. And he cannot live in a world where he did not do everything for her.
And that question of what would you do? Because we think, when Paul writes that husbands are to love your wives as Christ loved the church, we're like, okay, I'll lay my life down. What does that mean? And we've talked about this a little bit before, and maybe not a little bit. Maybe we've talked about it a little more. But that idea of...
We might have murdered an entire podcast of talking too much about marriage and not enough about The Martian.
I'm not even talking about that one. I'm just thinking in general. But this idea of what does it mean to lay down your life? I love, that idea that he said that rational thought destroys your soul. If we look at the world through a rational lens, through an external lens, through this is the reality of the life I live in, what room is there for the soul? And then what room is there for myth, for God, for our imagination, for all the creativity and stuff? Then life is simply what we see. Whereas, even going back to Elijah, he's like, "Oh, my Lord, we are surrounded." His servant comes out and says the whole army showed up because they were against him as a prophet. And he said, "Lord, open his eyes that he may see that an angel army is surrounding the enemies that are surrounding them." But if all we look at is the stuff against us, if all we look at are the cold, hard facts, it will destroy our soul, because what room is there for hope? What room is there for transformation? And I can't remember the last line he said, something about how little control we actually have. Like, for them, they were just going to dinner with his brother. She was just leaving work. We see at the end of the movie that she is in fact innocent. But they had no control over what happened. And he is, as you mentioned, he's pursued all the legal ramifications. He's pursued everything he can. And so what do you do when you've done everything rational? Well, you must turn to the irrational. And look, we are not saying that John is a Jesus figure or a Messiah in this movie. But we're looking at him as an example of what does it take to give up. I mean, he gives up his house. He gives up his free time, basically. He gives up everything to be with his wife. And in these scenarios, when you have a wife who is not a partner, or a husband who's not a partner.
Oh, yeah.
It's super easy to go to resentment, to go to, they are the problem with my marriage. If they would get their stuff together, everything would be fine. That's actually something my wife would tell me. She's like, if you're okay, we're okay. Like, that puts so much pressure on being okay. Because I am the thermometer, thermostat, whatever you want to say. I am the measurement of success in our marriage. And I knew that. I know that's not going to end well. But when we look at sort of taking that pressure, okay, bring it on. If I will be okay because of my love for you, as you mentioned, because whoever we are married to is a son or daughter of God, is a created being, is invested with the image of the living and creator of the universe. But what we see is the rational. But we need to grasp the irrational, because that's what Jesus did for us. And in Philippians, it talks about how he humbled himself, how Jesus set aside his rights as Jesus. Like Jesus, was there when the world was created, presented it to humanity as a sort of a wedding gift, knowing that he would be rejected. He's born God, throne room of heaven, in a manger, in a stable. Lives life working hard as a carpenter, as a carpenter's son, as an apprentice, as all these things going up. Like Jesus didn't have to do any of it. And when he shows up, it's all about, what can you do for me? Feeds the mobs, feeds the multitudes multiple times. They're like, let's make him king because he fed us for free. Nobody says that, right? But what was the president who's promised a chicken in every pod or something? Like, we want to vote for that guy. He heals 10 lepers and only one person comes back to thank him. So many times he moves in compassion without expecting a response. And how infrequently as a husband do I act without expecting a response? Oh, I emptied the dishwasher. That means somebody should be getting lucky tonight, right? I made dinner. Let's go hang out and have a conversation. Like, let's spend time together. I do this. I expect a response. And it may not be sexual. It could just be, oh, thank you. Or it could be like, I took my wife, I could tell she was on a call in work, and I poured myself a cup of coffee. I wanted to go kiss her because she was leaving. She's going away for the rest of the week. And so I wanted to go sort of, she had gotten to work. I was kind of lounging in the bed. So I just wanted to kiss her to love on her a little bit. But I knew that she was on the camera on a call that would not be appropriate. But I knew her coffee cup was empty. So I just went and refilled her coffee cup. And I don't need a thank you. I don't need anything. It's just, I was doing it because I was expressing my love for her. And when we model our lives after Jesus, that's what it looks like. An expression of love without needing a response. And it's really difficult. We're going to go to our next clip, which is your favorite clip of the movie. It's really difficult because there will always be somebody who's waiting to respond to areas that we feel unresponded to.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We feel like in this scenario, Laura's in jail. John's raising their son. He's stressed, lonely, frustrated, hopeless, helpless, all the things. Well, his son meets a little girl. They share cookies. And of course, when the kids start interacting, the parents start interacting, and she's an attractive woman. He's, Russell Crowe. So sparks fly, but he stays true. But it shows the difficulty in that I think we all face at one time or another.
We're gonna grab a bite to eat. Would you like to come?
Oh, no, I don't. We're kind of...
Busy? Come on, we owe you for the cookies.
Well, that's true. And I did make those cookies myself.
And learned how to prepackage them.
Come on, Luke.
So, do you trade off time with Luke?
No, Luke and I are together full time.
Wow. I guess that's why I see you so much.
She'd like nothing better than to be here with him. Lars, she misses all this.
I guess it's all about priorities, isn't it?
No, she's not like that. She's in prison.
Oh.
I don't tell most people.
No, I understand.
She's innocent. She didn't kill that woman.
Good. I mean, I'm sure she didn't.
We really should be going home.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much for the invitation. We will try and make it.
That would be great.
Goodbye. Luke.
Bye.
Come on.
Such an awkward interaction.
Yeah, that's not a scenario you ever get to practice for before you're in it. This is the single most pivotal crux of every hard decision he has to make. It's fun. You know, the man's heart thumps whenever he's in the daring do, you know, in the underworld stuff he's got to figure out. And then when it becomes, you know, high octane action and he's not trained for this stuff, but he's going in there face first anyway. That stuff is fun and surely requires bravery, but I don't think there was anything that required more courage from him than to say no to such an easy reboot of the whole story. Because at this point, he is fully justified to cut his ties with his wife, divorce her peaceably, still do all the things so that she gets whatever kind of visitation access she can to their son Luke. But man, here's a new woman that is witty. She's attractive. She looks at him with attentive eyes. I mean, how much is his heart aching for that kind of attention, for somebody to listen to him, to see him? And she seems like a woman that does that. You know, she's a pleasant conversationalist. And he says no to all of that. Doesn't even entertain it. You know, it's almost like the instant anything was potentially crackling between them, he immediately goes full distance management on it. He's polite to her, but like he goes right back into this is only civil, you know, draws the lines. There's no more even potential relationship between them from that point forward. That is such a big man to be that faithful to his wife when he's got every pass he needs. And it looks like this would be a really pleasant life to walk into. He says no and dies again. Like that's another moment where he chose to die for the sake of his woman.
All along in the movie, everybody's kind of telling him, look at the evidence. Just look at the evidence. And all the evidence shows she had a fight with this woman. Her fingerprints are on the fire extinguisher that was used to bash in. She had her blood on the back of her coat. Look at the evidence. Again, going back to that idea, the rational will destroy your soul. Because he's like, yes, I can see the evidence, but I know who she is. And I refuse to believe it. And we're going to go super fast to another clip, I guess, where he's back soon after this conversation. And I believe it's because he's sensing the tension is ratcheting up for how that's right. She got slated to move to another prison. But that will ruin all the plans that he has established. So he hasn't told her that, I mean, I don't know. You can't pass a secret in the middle of this because they're watched, they're recorded.
I think he also knew that he couldn't rely on her to go along with the plan.
Right. Yeah, he'll say that later.
He knows her well enough. He's got to hoodwink her.
Right. So she doesn't know that he is planning to break her out of prison. It is imperative that she does not move prisons. Otherwise, he sort of starts all over. And all his work has been in vain. And so he goes to visit his wife and say, look, I talked to our lawyer to try to stop this. And she sort of breaks under the pressure. Because, and we've talked about this before, it is very difficult. And we know this from personal experience. It's very difficult to receive love when you don't feel worth it, when it overwhelms the reality and the rationality of your situation. One of the hardest things I've found is to receive God's love. Knowing the mess of my life, knowing the mess of my internal machinations, my inner workings. One of the most important grounding practices for me is to receive God's love. And we talked about this in with Transformers Rise of the Beast. We talked about that like for many women, it's difficult to receive love from their husband. Like, what does that look like? How can I receive that? How can I believe that and trust his love for me? And so we see sort of she breaks with that situation where she's overwhelmed by his heart for her.
I asked Meyer to look into not having you moved. I told him that traveling that distance would be a hardship on us, that Luke was already having problems at school, which is true. I haven't been spending enough time with him.
You haven't.
No.
You haven't. Jesus, John. You really are too much. Luke is having a hard time because Mommy's in jail for murder, not because Daddy doesn't spend enough time with him. Your father's right. You really don't live in the same world we do.
It's nice that the two of you talk. What world do I live in, Laura?
Well, I don't know, John, but it's not the real one. The one in which I'm in here for the rest of my life. So don't be talking to me about fantasies like there's some happily ever... Be good here.
Yes. Sorry.
Oh, now you're gonna sit here all long-faced like you let me down. I mean, what do you want me to do here? You want me to make you feel better?
Got it. Sorry.
Now you're apologizing. You really are a gem.
What do you want from me, Laura?
What do I want from you? Nothing. You're already too perfect. You know, you never even asked me if I did it. If I killed her.
Because I know you didn't.
Well, then you'd be wrong.
That's a hard scene. Yeah, even you can't. Yeah, obviously the audio clip. You don't see the hard face on the female prison guard. It's like, here he is. He's catching it from both women. Like his wife just dogging him for being good, and then the prison guard's looking at him like like he's the cantankerous husband, stirring up an argument. And she even does it when she walks their ex, and she's like, I'm done here. And so they walks out. The prison guard lady, she even like looks over his shoulder like, you're such a jerk. It's like the dude just can't catch a break. And he's still polite. He gets drawn into the argument for like half a second where he's like, oh, it's nice to hear you guys are talking.
Yeah.
And then right up is like, that was it. He pulls himself back, reins it back in. That's another indicator. I mean, his wife is not being gracious with him at all. She has no idea at this point how much that he has been suffering on her behalf. And there she is, like, yeah, she's suffering as well. Stuff that's not her fault. But in that trauma, he's catching some of the residual damage. It's like she's hurt, and so now he's going to hurt as well. It's like she can't help but lash out at him. And even then, he's still going to be exceedingly kind to her and wanting nothing but the very best things for her.
She is suffering. Our wives, and any women listening, your husbands, there are wounds and traumas that we can't understand many times or imagine or sometimes even know about. And so she is taking her hopelessness, her frustration, her helplessness, and she's saying it very sarcastically, but it's like, what a gem. Why do you, I don't want you to stop coming here. Stop wasting, because she believes she's a waste of their time. She believes she's the reason for their son's problems. It's like, he's not having problems because daddy's not spending enough time with him. He's having problems because mommy's in prison for murder. Going back to the rational aspect. And just because something's true doesn't mean it has to remain that way. And she uses the only thing that she knows to try to push him away. You haven't even asked if I did it or not. And says you're wrong. And I have to admit, and when that happened, I was like, that's an interesting twist for this movie. And then
maybe I'm on team Jessica Biel all of a sudden.
But then a few minutes later, they come back and have a phone. It's not really a conversation, but basically him saying, it doesn't matter what you tell me. It's not going to change what I do, how I look at you. I can't remember the exact line, but this life is not the end. Wherever it is you're stuck, we'll get through this together.
Yeah. And then he hangs up the phone on his side of the glass and just looks at her. And at that point, she's frozen. You know, she can't believe that she's being loved again this ferociously. So she just cradles the phone, weeping, looking at him, and he just looks at her. And I think non-verbally, the story that he's giving her, he refuses to relent on continuing to tell her, I see you. I know you. I'm not going to give up on you. So many more dimensions of that than she, even when the heist happens, she really will never know what it cost him to love her. He could tell her all of the story and it still wouldn't translate. And in that moment, he's not concerned. He's not concerned with her understanding how much he's been sacrificing for her. He just wants her to feel seen.
Well, I doubt he'll ever tell her. Because it doesn't matter. Like, we'll never know what it costs Jesus, what it costs the Father for our redemption, for our transformation, for our freedom. We're in a prison we don't even know about.
What do you think about glory when it says we'll know even as we are known? Do you think we have full poetic knowledge and access to that dimension of the story in those days?
In our next life?
Yeah, in the world that is to come, how much of that do we become keen to?
I think we will. Yeah, I think we receive knowledge. Our story will make sense. The irrational becomes rational. Like, oh, this is why this had to happen. This is how this was birthed in me. This is how I was shaped into becoming who God intended me to be. That's one of the hard things dealing with my friend's illness, his cancer, is he is one of the few people who knows me and sees me. I always use that Doc Holliday reference where he's like, oh, I got lots of friends, and Doc Holliday says, I don't. And that's how it's like, I do have guys who know me, but when you've walked through 30 years of stuff, right? And you think of, again, laying back into the idea of marriage. When my mother-in-law died, I think 2-3 years ago now, and they had been married for like over 50 years. And sure, they might have issues, but he loved her immensely. It broke his heart when she died. And there's a sense that, again, when you spend so much time with somebody in such close proximity, how do you move on without them? And this, one of the things that my pastor has said a couple times over the last several months, because he says he does this when he's feeling anxious, when he's feeling scarce, when he's feeling less than. If a member of my family died, what would I give to bring them back? The answer is everything, right? Well, if I have them today, don't I already have everything? And that's how I know my father-in-law feels, is what would he give for one more day with his wife? We'd give everything. I would give everything for one more day with my friend. He knows if he calls, if he says, hey, dude, can you come down? I'm like, there are very, very, very few things that can't get canceled. It's like, I'll be there. It's worth the cost. And that's what we see in this movie with his wife. What would I give to have you back? I'll give up everything. I mean, he's even willing to give up their son in that one scene, which I thought was super interesting and powerful. She is not. And again, in showing her love, he's like, you know what? I can't take you. I can't rip that away from you. We will do that even if it means going back to jail. Once again, my plans are my plans, but your heart matters more.
Yeah. And you can see him doing the high level calculus, traveling at the speed of thought when he's running the time on what they got left. And then like, okay. And then he's coming up with some really quick ramshackle plans of like, Luke will be okay. You know, my parents, and we'll figure it out. That is pretty rational.
Yeah.
He's proven enough by this point to believe that, sure, we'll bootleg him into Brazil some kind of way, or wherever they end up going. But for her, there's that irrational love. And I think it's a thing that comes up. It seems like every few years I'll see it. You know, men and women get pulled. You know, if there's a dangerous situation and you're stuck choosing between your spouse and your children, which do you choose? Almost without fail, men say they would rescue their wives. Almost without fail, women say they would rescue the children. And it's like neither answer is wrong. Men and women generally are just wired that way. Women are more focused on their children. Men are more focused on their women. Sure, there's some overlaps and exceptions, but on the whole, he needs to get her into a better life on the safe assumption that Luke will be in a decent life. And then there will be an eventual chapter where everything's reconciled. She's already been separated from Luke for so long, that ain't going to happen. She can't be free without being reconnected to her child.
That's good.
And that's the bottom of it. And we see that even when she's with him, you know, we see it getting progressively worse in all the scenes that we have of him visiting her in jail.
Right.
She cannot be reconnected with her husband until she's reconnected with her child. It's like the circuit board of her heart. The electricity is not going to make the route until this synapse is established with her child again. And that's irrational in the best way. When we talk about the Don Quixote virtue of irrationality, at the bottom of it, it is impossible to give a forensic analysis of love. Hate is irrational. And we see that in the evils that perpetuate when you've got the Hatfields and the McCoys that just never stop in their warfare. But similarly, there's really not a rational argument to be loving, which means to hazard everything of yourself for the betterment of somebody else. It goes against all of our self-preservation instincts. Now, sure, if we want to do a deep dive investigation after and look at all the good things that love does, yeah. But when you're making the decision, it's near impossible to make it mathematically sound. And so you have to be irrational to live well in the world. You can't live in a fully sterile environment where it's nothing but particles and progress, and only that which can be negated through scientific investigation is somehow plausible. I hear people say that, but I don't think I see anybody that believes that so much they actually live by it.
Yeah.
You know, the atheists of the world, for the most part, don't actually live like atheists. There's still significant irrational love governing their behavior.
Right.
And then they try, well, it's for the betterment of the species and all the things. Like, who cares? Who cares what's good for the species when it's all going to succumb to the cold, deep crush in the end when the universe implodes on itself?
Yeah.
Love is inherently irrational.
The interesting thing, what you said, she can't be free without her son. But that feeling that she gets, they're flying down the highway, trying to beat the roadblock, and she's willing to throw herself out of the car. There will be times where we have to go through that so that we can become free of it. Where God will take us through things so that part can be set free. Like this idea, I can't be free without this. But she doesn't know it unless she goes through that risk of separation. And I think we go through that. Like, look at Abraham and Isaac. When God said, go sacrifice Isaac. Abraham had to trust God to be irrational, that even if he killed Isaac, God would provide another son of the promise.
Or in Paul's rationale, Abraham had already concluded that God must be resurrecting Isaac because all the promises hinged on him. It was a thing he never experienced before. But he was like, well, God must be bringing this one back from the dead. So, I mean, that's irrational, right?
Yeah. And I remember years ago, I saw a friend of mine post something like, I'm really getting tired of taking my Isaacs up the hill.
Oh, golly.
But that's sort of that scene, right? Where they both sort of have Isaacs that need to be sacrificed. What's really most important? Freedom isn't freedom without their son. Their family isn't their family without their son. But that idea that sometimes we have to go through that process in order to be free. We go through a lot of painful processes in order to become free on the other side of it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And that question that continues to come at us from different Christian circles, what is your bottommost identity in God? Men, what are you without your vocation, without your abilities? And how many things can get stripped away and it's still you? And what's left? What's the quintessential you there? So I agree with you on the premise of there's character formation that we suffer sometimes with great loss. It is a little different when we still have moral agency in the matter. And so her flinging herself out of the car, if there was no recourse, right? Like when she sees John refusing to double back in spite of the risks, she still has a decision that she can make. And that decision is, I'm going to do everything to be reconciled with my child. If there was another arrangement where all the roadblocks and the sirens, and he's got to be high speed chasey and super sneaky to get out of town, all the things, like maybe then she could rework it and be like, okay, we tried, but she can't move forward without trying in his direction. And so, God bless, tragic story that's all too common. But when a spouse is losing a loved one to an awful illness, they don't just roll over and go, well, this must be God's will. They do everything they can to preserve that life. And then if they suffer loss, well, then the next chapter of the story is, okay, how do I reorient to the story from this point forward? How do I understand myself again in God's presence and trust that she or he is being taken care of by him as well? But it's not the sort of thing you can just consign yourself to without first exhausting all the options.
Right. Just like in the movie where the prison break isn't the first option.
Right.
It's the last one when all other options have been exhausted. So I think we're going to take the last clip. We're going to take it over to our YouTube channel because it's a video and I haven't done those in a few months. So if you want to check out that as we look at the scene where John says goodbye to his parents, that was the one scene that really got me emotional, got me choked up, and we'll sort of say why. Look at that a little bit. But so Wailer, thanks for joining me today and introducing me to this interesting, engaging, and thought-provoking movie.
You did like it at least a little bit, right?
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Okay. All right.
I enjoyed it. Like I said, the chase scene, my heart's pounding. It was interesting. I liked Russell Crowe. I like Elizabeth Banks. So
I'm sensitive
Yeah,
of my
it's all good.
my movie choices.
I thought there'd be more Liam Neeson,
but what that one scene, man, like such a strong cameo. I just don't
He
want
kills
to
it.
threaten my probationary period with these movie selections at all. You know, there's all right.
No, you're good.
Excellent.
You're good. You're good. It's better than Red Dawn. Shots fired at Sarah. So we hope that you guys had a good Thanksgiving and have a great holiday season. Join us in 2 weeks. Our third anniversary edition, The Big Lebowski's coming out. And then after that, we're going to close out the year with a variety of Christmas movies that we'll think you guys will enjoy. So this has been Paul McDonald and Wailer Giles talking about the next 3 days. We hope you enjoyed it. And we hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?